Welcome to the Illuminating Primary Care podcast.
Hi guys, and welcome back to the Illuminating Primary Care podcast. I'm your host today, Jasmine Kaur, Nursing Allied Health Recruitment Specialist, and I am joined by Shilpa Patel, Lead GP Pharmacist and Partner at the WellBN Integrated Healthcare Hub, a pharmacist mentor as well, assessor and inspirational speaker. In this episode, we will be discussing things all clinical pharmacist related. So a role that is becoming increasingly popular and more common and integrated in primary care. And I'll have the privilege of delving deeper into Shilpa's first-hand experience and success story. So welcome to the podcast, Shilpa. Lovely to have you on board.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. I'm really excited to be here today.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm definitely excited for this episode. And I guess we can start off with a bit about your experience and more about the role as well. So as we know, it's becoming increasingly popular in primary care, clinical pharmacists, especially with the arts funding. Kind of what would you say a clinical pharmacist can bring to general practice? Because I still think there's a lot of practices out there that probably don't have the full picture, kind of an insight. But yeah, how do you think a clinical pharmacist would complement a multidisciplinary team?
So, I think a lot of pharmacists out there don't really realize that they've got these skills from whatever setting they're working in at the moment. So, may it be a community pharmacist or a hospital pharmacist, any pharmacist can easily bring their skills that they've learned over the years from their previous role. The role's pretty different to what they would have been doing before, but the kind of skills that I think pharmacists who have come to my practice bring with them are, they're the experts in medication. So we do spend a lot of time dealing with kind of dosage changes, optimizing medication, looking at side effects of medications, the interactions. So we are the medicine experts, and that's how I kind of bring pharmacists in and make them realize that they are the medication experts. And when we're part of the multidisciplinary team, we can, really show our knowledge, our pharmacological knowledge. And I feel any pharmacist that joins general practice, they do end up studying a lot more. I mean, I did for the first 2 years. I was reading about all sorts of drugs and everything, because that you're using your clinical skills a lot more. And so your interest kind of is evoked suddenly, because you feel like you're able to use all this drug knowledge. So you do end up kind of studying a lot more and learning a lot about it. Other areas that we're involved in is the transfer of care, so the transition between kind of hospital or other settings and GP. So there's often a lot of medication errors that can happen at that point. So we're part of the reconciliation process. We can look into kind of duplications or things that have been missed off the records. And we look at the interactions when patients are put on new medications, and that they're on the correct doses, and that their monitoring is being done after kind of the records have come over. And another area that we work with the multidisciplinary team is education. So we not only educate the patients, but we're also educating the staff. So, we're kind of the medicine experts in our surgery, and we get queries every day from nurses, doctors, and other physicians, just asking us to spend, we've got the time to investigate, new therapies or any kind of interactions or any kind of new treatment pathways, so things that GPs might have concerns about but haven't got the time or the expertise to look into. And we've got a lot of resources that we can tap into. We also are involved with all the drug alerts. So we are constantly looking out, we get the alerts come to us, we make sure they're actioned upon, and we educate the rest of the team about it, educate the patients about it. We set up new guidelines, we write up new protocols. So that's all about kind of the information and education side. And other than that, we kind of are just part of the whole decision-making process. So we look at kind of different medication options, any kind of pharmacological and non-pharmacological changes that we can make to patients' kind of treatment plans. And we use a lot of evidence based. So, generally, pharmacists are there to increase the safety. I always think, we're the medication experts. We have a big role in making sure medication is being prescribed safely. Patients are being cared for using the best kind of treatment. And then we use a lot of the kind of optimization. So I think that's pretty much how we contribute to the multidisciplinary team, just increasing safety and giving better patient outcomes at the end.
Absolutely. No, that was a great, you encompassed pretty much, I think, every skill and how to utilize a clinical pharmacist kind of most effectively. I think there's a plethora of skills that you guys bring to primary care in any team, and incredible assets. I always say that. And I think even my clients and practices that I've worked with that haven't had a clinical pharmacist before, they're like, wow, like we didn't expect they could do X, Y, and Z, or kind of the skills that they can bring. So yeah, that's a really good outline. Thank you, Shilpa. And when it comes to, I guess, QOF as well, being one of the major things in primary care and practices, how is it that clinical pharmacists can help alongside QOF, IIF, kind of those frameworks?
So I think that's probably one of the areas where we can be utilized very, very well, because they're obviously our income streams. So it's really, really cost effective to use these R's roles to bring in pharmacists, and then we're immediately having high impact on kind of the income streams. So with QOF, I think at my practice, we're involved in the cardiovascular and respiratory QOF targets the most. So with the asthma, we have to review every single asthma patient. So we're heavily involved in that. Hypertension, we've taken over all the hypertension reviews, and there's a lot of case finding going on. So trying to identify patients who've got high blood pressure, and then put in place the whole diagnosis pathway. So pharmacists can easily get involved in that. The other QOF target that we spend a lot of time with is cholesterol management. So that's a new QOF target that, previously we used to only get paid for that via IIF and other funding streams, but now there is a QOF element. So there's two kind of targets that we need to work on. So that's straight away was identified as something the pharmacist could be involved in. And then I think the cardiovascular ones there's a stroke and TIA QOF target. There's secondary prevention of CVDs, and I suppose hypertension is the other one. And there's an AF one and an atrial fibrillation one. So they're kind of the areas that my pharmacy team have always been involved in with regards to QOF. And IIF last year was pretty much all medication related. So we were involved in probably about 70% of the IIF work was done by the pharmacists. And it's all to do with doing structured medication reviews. So we had to, it was crazy. We were doing so many structured medication reviews, hundreds and hundreds. And they would never have got done if we didn't have all our pharmacists on board. I can't remember the figures now, but there was hundreds we had to do. We had to review every patient who was on an NSAID and make sure they had gastroprotection. And then we had to review every single DOAC patient and make sure their monitoring was in place and they were on the correct doses. We had to optimize all the inhalers. So you have to do a full structured medication review. And there's certain qualifications involved to be allowed to do a structured medication review. And I think and then there was quite a few CVD elements in the IIF. So that again was to do with cholesterol and hypertension. So we spent a lot of time kind of doing those. But they're all things that pharmacists are really they're very good at doing it. We're very interested in it. It's coming from community pharmacy. For me, this has been like very fulfilling. It's something that I really enjoy doing, and I think I speak for all the pharmacists at my practice. It's just you feel like you're improving patient lives. So you're putting your all into it, and we're quite target orientated. So we get we get given a figure, and we're like, yeah, I'm going to beat that. So we spend a lot of time trying to reach these targets, and we're quite keen to get involved in these areas.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And like hearing that stat, 70% of the work for IIF was carried out by pharmacists. It just shows you kind of the huge support that they bring, and why they are vital clinicians, I think, to any multidisciplinary team. And yeah, similarly with CQC, kind of how would your team of pharmacists and how do pharmacists contribute with that?
So we've just had a CQC visit, actually. We had it in May. So I was all over CQC. I've been working on it for we knew we were due, so we'd been working for it probably for about a year now. So I don't really want to hear the word CQC again, but I know all about it. And so there's 5 things that they mark us on in CQC, and the safety element is the one that I took charge of. And I suppose with CQC, there are Ardence searches. So they're like inspection reports, which you can get on your system. And you run these reports, and these are the reports that the CQC inspector runs before they come in. And that kind of, as long as you're running those on a regular basis and you stay on top of those, that kind of shows CQC that you're kind of fulfilling all the requirements that they need for safe prescribing, which is a huge element of the CQC checks. So what these reports do is they show what your monitoring is like. So it will identify patients who aren't being monitored the way they should be monitored. So that's like patients on ACEs, ARBs, DOACs, and other high-risk medications. So you run these reports. We do it at a surgery. We run them once a week now, and we just identify any patients who haven't turned up for their monitoring or whatever. And then these reports also deal with a lot of asthma and optimization or making sure that patients' asthma is controlled to the best, so they're not overusing certain inhalers and things like that. There's also reports on cardiovascular, on kind of hypertension management. And another big important one for CQC is benzos. So benzodiazepines and pregabalin and gabapentin, drugs that can be abused. So a pharmacist team or a pharmacist joining a GP practice, one of the first things I would recommend for them to do is run those reports and get all of that kind of under control, because that can take up to a year to get under control, because there's so many processes that you need to put in place for that to be able to achieve that. So that's kind of one side of CQC. They look a lot at antimicrobial prescribing or antibiotics. So it's kind of just understanding how the CQC, what checks they do, and making sure that you're complying with the kind of checks that they're going to run on your system. And then the other side is the whole repeat prescription process. So they come in and they really scrutinize your repeat prescription process and make sure everything's kind of being done safely and effectively, really. And so that includes the monitoring of medication. They also look at your reconciliation protocol and make sure the transfer of care is safe. They look at your controlled drugs. So they look at they actually go in and look at individual patient records to see if you've spotted controlled drugs that are being ordered early, and if you have got patients where controlled drugs are being overprescribed, what you're actually doing, and have you documented in the notes that you've been kind of trying to improve the prescribing in those areas. Same with the monitoring. They'll go into certain patients and check that so if patients haven't turned up for their monitoring, they'll go in and check what you've actually done. So I have to make sure our repeat prescription process is, really tight knit. So even if patients aren't turning up for their monitoring, we make sure we've chased them up, we've recorded that we've called them, or we've written to them, or we've stopped their prescriptions if appropriate, things like that. So they really kind of go in detail and look into all of those things. And I think there's two other areas that we kind of got really heavily involved in with CQC. One was the alerts. So they're really high on MHRA alerts and drug updates and things like that. So they look at how you've dealt with the alerts, how you've communicated it within the team. So you have to log kind of every communication. So if there's a new alert, I make sure I send an email to every single member of staff, and then I log that to show to CQC what I've been doing and what patients we've contacted. And the last one's medication reviews. So we actually had an inspection a couple of years ago where we didn't do very well on our medication reviews. We had done GPs had done a lot of medication reviews, and sometimes when you're reviewing one medication, it automatically codes it as a medication review. So when CQC come in, they run a report, and they could see lots of consultations that have been recorded as medication reviews, but they weren't really full reviews. There was only maybe one medication that had been reviewed. So we had to change the way that we do our coding and everything. And so now we've kind of put in a new system where only pharmacists do the medication reviews, and we're doing full medication reviews, and we make sure that everyone has them once a year. And so this time in May, when they came in and checked it, they literally have a report that we can run as well. We can see the report. So I run those reports all the time. And you just make sure that you're doing your medication reviews the way they want it. There's a certain kind of way that you have to document it and everything. So we got really involved in kind of that side of things. So yeah, there's loads that pharmacists can get involved in with the CQC.
Perfect. Yeah, definitely so many facets and elements to it. Very meticulous, but I didn't realise the extent and kind of how meticulous and thorough it was, and how much a clinical pharmacist contributes to that. And you mentioned about the repeat prescribing process. So kind of how have you set up your process? Because I know that you just referenced, you have to be quite tight on it. So kind of what steps have you put in place to ensure that it's quite streamlined?
Okay, so I've kind of I've been at the practice for 9 years, and I've kind of been changing my repeat prescription process every couple of years, just reviewing it and updating it, and obviously things change all the time. We've got we've ended up with like an idiot-proof guide in the end, and it's actually we've got a prescription team now. So we've got 5 members. We've got 25,000 patients, just to put that into perspective. And for those 25,000 patients, we've got 5 technicians who work on our repeat prescription process. And every single medication, so we've got like an Excel spreadsheet. Every single medication is on there. And we've got kind of a protocol for every medication. If the patient's only had it on acute, whether the prescription team can issue it or not. If the medication is on their repeat, what checks need to be made before they can issue their prescription. And although the system, so we use System 1 does lots and lots of checks, we found that there was still checks that were kind of being missed off. And it doesn't take a lot more for my team to kind of do those extra checks, and it just saves us a lot of hassle and work in the long run. So every single prescription request that comes through is now kind of going through the prescription team, and they do these certain checks for every single medication. It takes quite a while to train the team up to be able to follow this protocol. But once they're trained up, they seem to, I mean, once you've been doing it for about 3 months, you know the protocol inside out. So there's not, it doesn't take very long after that. But we're quite strict in our surgery, so GPs don't issue repeat prescriptions at all. It's only issued by the pharmacy team. So where I've kind of been more generalized over the years, and now I've just gone very specific, because every medication, I mean, each group of medications can be treated to some extent the same. And I think we've just put it down to each medication, because training the prescription team, sometimes they don't remember what group it belongs to or what category it comes under. So we've kind of decided to do it that way, and it's just quicker for them to look it up when they need to. But each medication has certain monitoring that they need, and we're just really careful on that, specifically for CQC, because we realized how many checks they actually do. And the main ones are the ACEs, the ARBs, the DOACs, and the thyroid medication. Those ones, and the high risk ones, so the DMARDs, lithium, kind of. There's a whole list if you ever Google on the CQC kind of website, and they do such detailed checks on these meds, and it is a requirement for us to make sure the monitoring is happening. So yeah, we're really, really strict on our prescribing policies.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds fantastic in terms of what you've done and kind of the system and the process that you've got in place now. And like you said, it's imperative, especially in line with CQC and patient safety. But also by the sounds of it, it sounds like your training for the team is brilliant. Obviously you've got such a strict and thorough process that I'm presuming, your training with your team is second to none as well, to get them up to that standard, which is brilliant. And I guess when it comes to opportunities in primary care, a question that I'm asked frequently, especially with those pharmacists coming from more a community setting or even secondary care, is kind of what opportunities are available within general practice, kind of, what career routes, kind of what prospects are there. So I think kind of what would you say is available, and kind of what is the route for a clinical pharmacist looking in general practice?
So at the moment, you can be a PCN pharmacist, which means that you work across several different surgeries. So each PCN will have 2 or 3 or maybe more surgeries that have kind of come together and are working together. So if you're a PCN pharmacist, you will work across those 3 or 4 surgeries. And the other option is to just work for one GP practice on its own. And I've done both. I've worked as a PCN pharmacist. I worked, and I didn't like it at all. It's easier to get a PCN job because there are a lot of PCN roles and there's a lot of funding for PCN roles. My kind of advice would be, if you can work with one GP practice, and that's not just coming from my experience, just every pharmacist I've worked with over the years. I just feel like if you're working in one GP practice, you can have more of an impact. It's really, really difficult to work across 3 or 4 surgeries, because you're working like a day in each one, and it's I suppose it's a bit like locuming in a community pharmacy, where you're just there for the day and you're not having an impact. And one of the main things with GP kind of roles is it gives you that fulfillment. You get real good job satisfaction. So if you're in one surgery, I just feel that's kind of that's what I've always felt in everyone I've kind of spoken to. But PCN is a really good way to get in there. You get put on a CPP pathway, so you get your 18 months of training, and that teaches you everything you need to be able to work in this clinical pharmacist role. I think everyone's offered the IP at the end of that training, so you become an independent prescriber. PCN role will definitely be your way into this kind of work. And then I know there's medication review pharmacists. I'm not too sure how you become. I think that's probably through a CCG or an ICB, but you can be a medication review pharmacist, which means you just do medication reviews all the time. Whereas when you're a PCN pharmacist or a GP based pharmacist, you get more involved in kind of chronic health conditions and other areas, and the QOF and IIF work and things like that. And then like in my surgery, we've got 9 pharmacists now, so I've been looking at a lot of specialization, so they're all kind of specializing in different areas. So everyone who comes in and joins our practice, they're all they start off as kind of general pharmacists, so they learn kind of everything. They start off with one topic and get to another and another, and in probably after about a year or so, we figure out what drives them, what they're feeling really passionate about, and then we make them a specialist in that area. And that really helps me to have like these specialists, and I send them on all the courses, and I make sure we've always got a specialist in every area, so they can help us with educating the rest of the team and feeding things back. So I think that's probably it's all quite new, even though it's been going on for about 8-9 years, but it's still quite new, and people haven't quite got to that level yet where they've had to go any further. But the specialization is definitely there, and I know there are training courses to make you a specialist. Like, so I went on a mental health specialist course at university, and so you can do things like that. And then obviously there's management and leadership. So that's the route that I've taken. So I've gone into I'm doing a lot of leadership courses, and just learning how to manage a pharmacy team and manage the practice. Really, I've been dipping in and out of different kind of roles within our practice, and so I'm getting involved in anything that I'm interested in, really. And then obviously there's GP partnership, which is a whole different ball game.
I know, I bet, but I think you've covered it greatly there in terms of the opportunities available, and I think you providing those courses and supporting your team with specialisms, down the line it's so key, even to retain your staff as well. I think when I speak to a lot of pharmacists, it's is that element of support there in the long run, like training, development, and it's so key because you're probably where it benefits your team hugely and the patient population. And it's just, I think if you can invest in your staff, that's the biggest game changer, I think, for retention.
I'm always worried about kind of them getting bored, and I'm like, what's the next thing? I'm constantly thinking of, how to keep them motivated. And I think everyone just wants to grow, and everyone wants to be challenged. And I've got to a point where one of my pharmacists has been with me for 5 years now. And, the first few years was easy. I was teaching her everything, and now she's kind of outskilled me, and she's so excellent in all areas. So I'm like, okay, let me send you on all these courses now. And I'm constantly thinking of ways to keep them motivated, and they are. I mean, there's loads of scope. There's so much that we can learn, and so many courses available. And so there's they're always going to be growing. I mean, I've been here 9 years and I'm still learning new things every single day, so there's loads to learn.
Absolutely. Every day's a school day, as I say. But no, sounds like brilliant management from yourself, Shilpa, in terms of how you manage your team. And I guess your success story, obviously, you've gone down the route of GP partnership, something that's not as common. But I'd love to hear kind of how you actually kind of went into the role, how you transitioned from community and kind of the story behind it.
So it's a long story, but going on for 9 years. But I suppose maybe I'll just think about the kind of key steps, towards getting here, and kind of how it has completely changed my life. It's changed my career, but it's also changed my life. I think when I took on the role as a GP pharmacist, I came from community pharmacy, and I think one of the things that I did different to a lot of the other pharmacists who joined at the time was, like, we were all told to do medication reviews, and we were all asked if we wanted to set up a clinic, which I did. But I very early on kind of identified, for example, the repeat prescription process. I really wasn't happy with it. I felt like there was a lot of unsafe prescribing going on from day one, and I was really concerned about, what was going on in our GP practice. So I kind of went up to the practice manager and I said, I'm not happy. Like, I don't feel like it's safe. And he was, luckily enough, he listened to me, and he said, what do you think we should do? And I was like, I think we should do it like this and this instead. And he literally, within, I think it was about 3 weeks later, all my clinics had finished. Like, he cancelled all my clinics, and I kind of went into an admin role of just, setting up the repeat prescriptions, this new process. And I started spending a lot more time looking at processes and trying to improve kind of the whole practice. And I actually went back into running the same kind of clinics 2 years later, but by then all the processes kind of had been set up. And the NHS England pathway that I joined was a 2-year path. It was a 2-year pilot pathway, and at the end of it, we weren't sure if we would be given a role or what would happen. So I went in for my kind of 2-year review, and they could have said, we're keeping you on, or we don't need you anymore because the funding's kind of finished. And that was the time when they said, we definitely want to keep you. And I kind of knew they were going to keep me because I'd made so many changes by then. I thought, they don't even know how to run this place without me. But that's when they offered me partnership, and they said, we'd like you to be partner. And I was quite hesitant in the beginning because I'd never heard of it before. I didn't really know what I was putting myself into, and I didn't want to kind of go back to when I was working in a community pharmacy. I was working all hours, and I was like, really overworked, and I didn't want to get back into that again. So initially I kind of didn't want to do it, but they assured me that I wouldn't be working all hours, and I kind of set my terms out and decided to give it a go, really. And I even asked them, I was like, why would you offer me partnership when I haven't even requested it? But they were worried that I was going to leave, because they were worried that I'd learned so much and I'd made such a big impact, and that I would leave and go and do that somewhere else. And they were quite upfront about that. So they wanted me to be a partner. So I think a lot of people who've asked me kind of in the past, I've always said, like, if you make that huge impact, and I became part of the spine of the surgery, and I kind of got myself into a position where if I left, they just wouldn't know how to kind of
function without you.
Yeah. And it would go back to where it was, and nobody wanted to go back to where it was. And, so if you get yourself into that kind of a position, and have a good understanding of how everything works, they can't really say no. If there's people out there who want to become a GP partner, it's kind of getting yourself really embedded, really understand the income streams, really understand reports. I spent a lot of time learning how to run reports and really kind of understand the background work, because I always felt like running a clinic, you can be replaced by another pharmacist or a nurse or a doctor, but when you're doing all that background work and making huge impact, that you become quite irreplaceable. And then it has changed my life. I do work every hour of the day. That didn't actually happen in the end. I used to finish at 4:00 on the dot. That never happens anymore.
Oh gosh. Perks of partnership.
But I think it's something, yeah. So it is quite a lot of work. It's more flexible, so I can take a lot more time off whenever I want, and I am my own kind of boss, my own manager. And I think what I really enjoy is that I kind of pick and choose what I want to do. So if it's something I really enjoy, I'll put all my energy into it. And if it's something I don't enjoy, I can easily delegate it. So that's something that, I really enjoy. What I've really, really enjoyed is growing my team, growing the team of every year I bring in a new pharmacist and I train them up, and each pharmacist has such a huge impact on the whole team, and to the point where there's a GP shortage and we can't find GPs when we've had a couple of GPs who have retired, and there's no way we can replace them. Really difficult to employ GPs, and so we're just every year we just keep trying to figure out ways that pharmacists can take over roles of GPs. So I don't think we've employed any new GPs since I joined the practice. It's kind of like we just keep replacing them with pharmacists now. And every time we get more funding, it goes towards recruiting a pharmacist. So it's kind of really raising the role of pharmacists, and that bit's been wonderful. It's been really nice.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, that's lovely to hear. I mean, hats off to you. Clearly, you've had the drive and the initiative, and the partners saw that. And to have the opportunity, and it sounds like you've done a fantastic job with the team. And even like you said, we're in a climate where there is that GP shortage, and I think it's so important for practices to look at other avenues and look at other clinicians and how they can contribute. And it sounds like you've done an incredible job with your pharmacy team, which is ever growing, which is brilliant. No, that's perfect. And I guess lastly, I just want to say congratulations. You're now, is it a judge on the on the panel for the GP Awards?
Oh yeah.
So I saw your post.
Very
That's a
exciting.
huge opportunity. I'm presuming from all the work that you've done and kind of the mentoring, the projects, and hopefully we may see you down there this year.
Oh yeah. I've been given a seat, and yeah, it's such an honor. I couldn't believe it when they asked me. I thought, that's a real honor. I felt really privileged to be invited to do that. So yeah, I jumped to that.
Yeah, such an achievement. And that's brilliant. But I very much appreciate you joining me, Shilpa, on the podcast. Really insightful and really informative for me as well, as someone who recruits clinical pharmacists on a day-to-day basis. I think what you've shared, your brilliant knowledge is going to be really valuable to any clinical pharmacist on a network listening to this. And so it is very much appreciated. And, if anyone does have any queries, I'm sure that you have your blog, is that correct? Or your
Yeah, I
website?
mean, I do write a lot on LinkedIn, so
Yeah.
any questions, if you put them through on LinkedIn, I'm happy to answer questions. I do have a blog. I've got a website called Ask Shilpa. And I'm putting pretty much everything I've learned over the last few years. So I've put a lot of clinical work on there, and I'm now going to start writing about income generating work, like the QOF work, the IIF work.
Yeah.
So everything I've talked about today, I'm going to start just sharing things on my website.
Yeah, brilliant. No, I think this is also be really valuable to my clients as well, and those looking to recruit a clinical pharmacist, kind of what to expect and how you can contribute. So all around a really great episode, Shilpa. So thank you for joining us. And yeah, hopefully you guys can stay tuned for the next episode on the Illuminating Primary Care podcast. But for now, it's a goodbye.